All right. Let me give you a little background before we go into chapter 2. Basically, the children of Israel had migrated through the story of Joseph, if you remember that, the coat of many colors and all that stuff. And so the brothers showed up, and they basically set up camp in Egypt because Joseph became a very powerful man in Egypt. But over time, things changed. And just from these 12 brothers, there would be a massive nation emerge. It says in the scriptures that they were multiplying and became very strong in the land of Egypt. And this brought fear into the mind of the Egyptians. And it says that a Pharaoh rose up, or a king, who did not know Joseph and probably didn't care to know Joseph, but he tried to instill in his people a type of racism against the Hebrews. And so he started talking to his own people and saying, you know what? The Hebrews are becoming mighty, and they're becoming larger than us. And if we were to ever go to war, it is very likely that they would join with our enemies and turn against us. So do you see the type of political intrigue that's going on here to turn an entire nation against a group inside of it? There were strangers in a strange land, but they were actually multiplying beyond the number of the people actually inside of that country. And so there was a total campaign to try to bring down these people because they feared a loss of power. People always will try to come against you for this loss of power thing, but we won't go into that too much. But so it turned out, we won't make it too long of a story to build up to, but what we have is that he wanted all the male children dead. And so first of all, he turned to the midwives. Now, midwives these days are actually a nurse practitioner, but back then it wasn't that. So what we have is he turned to the midwives and he said, I want you to kill any male child that is born to the Hebrews. Basically, it was going to be secretive in a sense, that they would maybe strangle it before anyone knew what was going on, or cover its mouth or something like that. So he tried to do it undercover. But the midwives wouldn't do that. They just couldn't bring themselves to do that. And so what he said, he brought them to him when they kept multiplying. And so what happens, he talks to the midwives, and midwives said, you know what, they are not like Egyptian women. They are hardy and they're very healthy. And they're giving birth before we even get there. So that tells you a little bit something about the physical nature of the Hebrews at this time, that he would actually believe that story, that none of the midwives are able to get there quickly enough, and they're just such a hardy people that they're giving birth all the time. Well, so finally he just says, that's it. We are simply going to kill all the male children. That's it. And as an Egyptian, you may do so. And so we have a brutal thing here. But you notice that there are these incredible stories in the scriptures that focus on the birth of children. God always starts from little things, and there are little things in life, little people. And in the eyes of God, there really are no little people. There are just big people who are starting out. And anytime there is a group of people in history that de-emphasizes the magnitude and the seriousness and the importance of children, that is a group that's going wayward, because every nation can be judged by how it interacts with those who are weakest among us. And who is always the weakest among us in every nation, no matter what the situation, is the children. And so in history, when you look back on nations that had no respect for what the life of a child is, and they didn't emphasize them at all, you see that they were brutal and they were cruel when you study that through history. The Romans just used to leave the children out to expose. In this day and age right now over in China, they have restrictions on how many children you can have, and lots of these people don't want anything to do with a female child because they're all trying to have a male child, and so lots of times they will just expose and leave out to die their own child if it was born a girl or something like that. So any nation that de-emphasizes the value of children is going towards a cruel level, and it will be magnified out towards the other people, because you know what? Guess what happens to you as you grow old? You become the weak in society as well. And if society is already cruel towards those who are weak in birth, what do you think they're going to do with you? Think of the Nazis. Well, anyway, let's move on. And so that's the scenario that we have here, that there is a death sentence upon all the male children. Well, it says that there was a man of the house of Levi. And Levi at this time was not an exalted type of tribe. There were things in its past that made it look down upon. But he's going to bring out a priestly class out of this tribe that is not looked well upon. It says that he married a daughter of Levi. So we see that the birth of Moses is inside of two priestly line parents. And so it's trying to send a message to us that this man has been prepared for what he's going to do, to stand as a priest before the people of God, before God. And so what happens here, it says that the woman, she conceived and she gave birth. And it says that she gave birth to a son, and that when she saw that the son was beautiful, that she hid him for 3 months. When she saw that there was something special. In the Hebrew, it says that there's more than just something just kind of special about this kid, because every mother, when you see that baby, what do you think? That's the best looking baby you've ever seen, right? To this day, I just know Gabriel's the best looking human ever born in history. Probably far more than Moses ever was. But so the thing here is that, but there was something unique. She could sense it, that there was something inside of this child. Well, who caused this to pass, that this child would be so embracing to the maternal instincts of a woman that she would risk her life, the life of her 2 other children, because you have Aaron and Miriam who were already born before the edict was issued. And so she's risking the life of her 2 children, probably the life of her husband, risking her own life, and she's going to try to shuffle around this one baby, all because there was something in that child that reached out to her spirit and laid hold of it. Any mothers here ever experienced something like that? To this day, now and then, whenever I want to cheer Kim up, I'll show the high-definition footage I have of the moment right after Gabriel was born. And he's sitting there crying and screaming, and the nurses are poking and prodding on him. And it just melts your heart. And I remember on that day looking at him and saying, this kid is born for something great. I can see in him that there's something great. This man might be another Moses for all I know. I'm determined that I'm going to play my role in helping with that. But the thing is that it caused that she would risk everything. And it says, though, there came a time when she could no longer hide him. And at that time it says that she brought forth a wicker basket, and she covered it over with tar and pitch, and that she put the child inside of it, and that she laid it by the reeds by the bank of the Nile. The bank of the Nile. Let's put it this way. Whenever society has become so dangerous to the life of a child that it's safer for your child to be down by the bank of the river Nile, society has gone really wrong. The river Nile has things like crocodiles and all kinds of things in it, and over in the reeds and stuff. Now, interesting thing that this wicker basket in your King James, if you got that, it probably says made of bulrushes or something like that. Well, that's basically papyrus. That's made from these reeds. And so, in a sense, she's making something that will look just like the reeds. Now, anyone who's involved in the military knows what she just did. She camouflaged him. She put him in a basket made of dried reeds into the reeds on the bank. Now, I want you to think about this. Moses is born into a nation of slaves, right? His mother has done all that she can. And mothers, because of their maternal instincts, sometimes can be given to all kinds of fears. Some that are unrealistic, some are very realistic. My mother had such a strong maternal instinct. I remember vividly when I was a kid that we're driving down the road, and just a car beside us on the road has a little kid sticking their head out, looking out at everything. My mother pulls up by this car, rolls down her window and says, "Get your baby back in the car!" Rolls it back up. And I'm just embarrassed going, "Mom, you're not the world's mother." But that's the nature of a true, strong, godly maternal instinct, is that it extends almost beyond your own children, doesn't it? And as we're going to see in this story, not everyone who has a biological child becomes a mother. Sometimes those who have no children of their own wind up, through the providence of God, they function as mothers over someone, and it plays a mighty purpose in the life of that individual. Have you ever known anyone who functioned as a mother, sometimes over people who are not their children? Happens all the time. And this is what God has put into society. Why? Because He loves children. And He knows that they need a mom. And so He does this all the time. So she lays him down in this basket. Now I'm going to guess here a little bit. Okay? It's not the worst guess in the world, but it's a little bit of a theological guess here. It's really hard to try to put someone on the couch these days and psychoanalyze them right here in front of you. So it's even harder to step back thousands of years ago and try to psychoanalyze someone back then. But I'm going to say that if this was me, given the scenario, this is a dual thing that's happening in the heart of Moses' mother. Moses' mother knows that she can't bring herself to kill him, and she can't leave it to the Egyptians to kill him. She's doing whatever she can to somehow preserve his life, because she knows if she hangs on to him now, he's getting to the age where she can't control the situation. It's getting beyond her parental control. And so she just simply does what she can. In some kind of vague hope, somehow she remembers back in her mind the story of Noah's flood, is what I believe is going on here, because every little Jewish girl knew the story of Noah's flood. And she creates a type of an ark for this little baby. And she thinks, if God can do it for Noah, maybe he can do it for my son. Just that small vague hope from those little stories that you heard when you were in Sunday school. And so she goes, and part of her on the other side of it, I think, is preparing his burial. In a real sense. She's thinking that this is a type of burial for my son. So inside of it, there's a type of hope that there may be life come from it, but also she wants to honor him in such a way that this may be it. This may be where he lies dead from exposure from the elements, because I guarantee you, you wouldn't want your baby to be inside of a wicker basket by the River Nile at all. And so I think there's a type of giving up of him. Hope involved, but a type of death involved. And she sees that somehow maybe this can work, maybe it won't. But this is all that she has left to do. And isn't that what God asks of a mother, though? To look at the situation and do all that you can. But there's going to be a limit to even the guidance that a mother can put to the situation. And at some point, you look back into the Scriptures and you find that there's a God of providence over all things, who is the God over the storm, who's the God over the reeds, he's the God over the Nile, and he's the God over everything. And somehow, at some point, you simply must let go of all of your fears and say, I simply must trust God for the guidance of my child. After I have done all that I can do to stand in an evil day, and having done all to stand, Ephesians 6. And that's what's going on here. So, she lays him there, I think partially for burial, puts him in the reeds, and I think she can't bear to see what happens. And she simply just has to leave, and probably does her mourning off on her own. But kids are funny. Kids are curious, aren't they? He has a sister. This is obviously going to be Miriam. Later we'll find out when he's older. He has a sister, and it says that she stands at a distance. And she just wants to find out what happens to him. Isn't this story totally realistic to what you know about kids? She's standing at a distance and just wants to know, what in the world is going to happen to my baby brother? So we see this little girl is still attached to him somehow. And the little girl in her little girl mind doesn't sense quite the danger that her mother does, because she's still just obsessed with this little baby brother. And siblings sometimes step into the role of a mother sometimes, don't they? So in a way, we almost have three mothers going on here, because obviously this is an older sister who takes an interest in this little child. And the interest that this loving sister takes into him is part of the providence of God to save all the Hebrews. Save her mother. Save all of them from the bitter work that they're doing, that they were enslaved to this nation. God's providence is mighty and great, and don't you ever overlook what God is doing through things that seem so horrible, so terrible, but the mighty hand of God is controlling and working all things, and that is the story of Joseph. And maybe she looks back partly to the story of Joseph, that Joseph is sold into slavery by his brothers. But somehow it works out in that he becomes a mighty ruler in Egypt, and he's able to save his entire family from the famine that would surely have killed them. God is not absent. You may think that he's asleep in the bottom of the boat, but he's not unaware of what you're going through. You know what? We may suffer from abandonment issues, and we sometimes project that onto God, but that is not the case with God. Ye of little faith. You must believe that God is there. And he's working through the history of this world and working through the history of your life. So I want to encourage you, it doesn't matter if you came from a poor start. God seems to make an example in the Scriptures of he'll take people who appear to be born for the purpose of just filling space and being a little worker bee in this life, and that they're going to be utterly insignificant, and that they'll go from insignificance and end in insignificance, and within that poverty that they've grown up in and the oppression of whatever situation they come into, God takes that individual to let everyone know that the heavens rule over all of the workings of this nation, the workings of this world, and the workings of the land, the working of everything, weather, it doesn't matter. You may see that it's total destruction and it looks like chaos, but God rules over all these things, and He will raise up from obscurity that person who seems to be a nobody. And everyone else has counted as basically some exposed child out there. That pitiful individual who will be soon forgotten. That's not the case. And I want you to know, if you've come from that type of background, that is not God's purpose. God has a plan for you that He will raise you up from obscurity to make you something that works in the whole process of His providence. So, and this is what happens. The providence of God steps into the situation. It says, the daughter of Pharaoh, of all people. You know how many women probably used to come down to the Nile to wash their clothing? And on this day, at this time, the daughter of Pharaoh, a princess, comes down. And the daughter of Pharaoh comes here to bathe in the Nile. And it says that she's with her maidens and they're walking along the Nile. It says that she sees the basket among the reeds. God calls attention to that. Maybe other people haven't noticed this. It's kind of camouflaged. It's made of reeds and it's floating in the reeds. But her eye is drawn to it. Maybe the child is crying loud enough that she can hear it. But anyway, she sends her maid, and the maid, because, you know, she's a little princess. She sends her maid. The maid probably has to wade through the water. Maybe a little bit dangerous. The princess certainly isn't going to do this. And she brings it to her, and what happens is she opens it up, and it says that she sees the child, and behold, the boy's crying. The boy's crying. It says that she had pity for him and said, isn't this one of the Hebrew children? Now, I want you to see this. She had pity for him. What is taken into this? God has put into little children something that solicits something out of you, right? You see a little child, some of these little babies in here. We got two beautiful little blonde babies running around here in here. Have you guys seen them with these blue eyes and these? They are crazy cute. And when I see them, you know what comes to my mind? The same thing that people say to me about Gabriel. I want to take him home. I want that to be mine. Who in here has ever told me or my wife, you want to take Gabriel? I know you're in here because sometimes I just have to ignore it and go, these people are crazy. But there's something that God has put into children that they solicit something out of us to make us somehow become maternal over them, right? My mom one day said to me, I don't know if she's trying to insult me or what, but she said, the way you dawdle over Gabriel, it's almost maternal. I'm like, right, because fathers can't love their children with a sense of gentleness. Is that it? Fathers have a lot of gentleness and attachment to their children, don't they? But sometimes they're taught it by watching their wives. So what happens is there's something that is soliciting from this woman. And we see that Moses is being paired up with someone who has great power, right? Have you ever met a little princess in this life? Don't they always get what they want? I tell you what, I've known some people in my lifetime that we used to joke and call them little princesses, and their parents would give them everything they wanted, and every new thing they saw, and they'd see someone had something, and they'd have to have the same thing, but be bigger and better, and they get whatever they want. And at this point, when you talk about the daughter of Pharaoh, I bet the daughter of Pharaoh has grown up getting whatever she wants for a long time. And this may be the one woman in this entire nation, the one woman in this entire nation who comes down at this time and sees this child who has the ability to override all the decrees about the killing of Hebrew children. And she basically can have what? What she wants. Now, so what happens is that little sister steps into the situation, and that little sister sees that maternal instinct getting fired up inside of that princess. And she steps in, and this smart, wise little girl tips it, just gives it the push it needs, right? She's sensitive to the situation. And she steps in and says the wide words, and she can see the workings in this princess's mind. You know, that look, I would like to take this home. This is a good-looking kid. I would like to have this. And all of a sudden that sister steps in and just pushes it over the edge and goes, would you like me to go get a nurse from among the Hebrew women that they may come and nurse him for you? Oh, the suggestion that came through the Holy Spirit right there, that small suggestion. What if she had never made that suggestion? But she did make the suggestion. And God worked through the smallest things. He worked through a little sister for the preserving of not just the life of that child, but for the destroying down of an entire army. That little godly little girl, the end result, as the dominoes begin to fall at this moment, are going to wind up destroying the entire army of Egypt. From the mouths of babes, God has perfected praise. So, then what happens? She looks at her and she says, The daughter of Pharaoh said to her, go ahead. Oh, she's going to do it. She's going to do it. Daddy might not like it, but you know what? This is princess. So, she goes ahead, and the girl, guess who she goes and gets? She goes and gets Mama. And she brings Mama back to her, and she says to her, you know what I would like for you to do? Could you go ahead and take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will pay you your wages? I want to encourage you, those fears that you often have, mothers, that it seems like, oh no, if everything might fall apart, if I'm not going to be over every single thing. But you know what? Everything ultimately is beyond your control. There's a limited amount of things that you can do, and you guide your child and you do the best that you can, but the hands of God are a better parent than you could ever be. And so in the end, what looks like this boy who was only alive for 3 months is going to only live for 3 months. But what happens? He goes down into this situation, and he's going to be nothing very quickly, but he's exalted. The first shall be last, and the last shall be first. Jesus kept hammering this over. Jesus knew his scriptures over and over. So, this woman winds up getting paid. She's getting paid to go ahead and nurse her own child. Will God provide for you? Will God care for your children? Just believe. Just simply believe, have faith, and put the fears behind you. And trust that you do all that you can, and God has already given you the strength to do what you're already doing, because it's not of you, because left to yourselves, you wouldn't love that child at all. All perfect gifts are from God, and they come through, and God has put that into mothers, and He activates it at the right moment to bring down entire nations and to lift other nations up, all through a mother. 2 mothers. And what happens is that she goes ahead and says that she nurses the child grows, and she brings the child back to Pharaoh's back to Pharaoh's daughter, and it says that he became her son. He was the Hebrew son, and now he becomes the son of this Egyptian princess. I want you to see what has happened here. Moses one day will become what? The great leader that will lead them all the way, and he'll lead them for his whole life. They'll wander 40 years in the wilderness, all these different things, but this man is being prepared from this moment right here. What could she give him other than just the faith in the God of his fathers? But he's being prepared, isn't he? In the face of the very enemy that is slaughtering every other child who is a male. He may be the only male child to survive his entire generation. The only single one. Just one. What can God do with just one? Doesn't He need an army or something like that? But God always works this way. He will always work this way. And from this one child, He sends him. And guess what? What nation on the planet at this time is this simply the most advanced technologically and academically on the entire planet at this time is Egypt. And he's being trained in the best schools. He's being trained in the mathematics of the Egyptians. He's being trained in the architecture of the Egyptians. They are building this man into a mighty sword against themselves. This man is going to know their workings in and out and everything about them. And he will turn it all on its head by the power of God coming in. That is what's happening with this. All through the occurrences of a mother's love who would not let go of him, and the love of a sister who knew the right words in season. And then I believe, and I'm guessing here, I don't think it's like the movies. I don't think it's like the movies at all. I believe that we have a sympathetic Egyptian who happens to be powerful here who knows what she's doing. I think that she knows this as the mother. And I think that it may even be a secret between mothers, not for the bringing down of Egypt, obviously, but I think it's something of her own compassion. And so we see a little bit of the nature and the character of the second mother in here, that she has a heart of compassion and pity on those who are weak. And God uses that little sense of good inside of her to make her a mother over him. So I want to encourage you. There are some people who don't have children. There are some people who may never have children. But God can use you to be the one who becomes the primary mother. Right? I have a cousin. Because of certain medical issues, he couldn't have any more children. He had one daughter. And for years, I could tell that he just longed, and he just longed for another child. And finally, he had considered maybe he was going to go ahead and maybe do something long distance through another country or something like this. And him and his wife were just aching in their bones for another child. They didn't have a boy. They wanted a little boy. And finally, one day, they were called up and said, are you still interested in adoption? Yes, we are. Well, you better come right now if you're going to adopt this child right now, today. They got a phone from, I think it was a church member. Like, what? And he just hangs up the phone and he goes, sweetie, do you want a baby? It's just been born. They got to make a decision right there. Well, yeah, I think, and they go down there, and that day, they had a baby boy. Woke up that morning not knowing that they were going to have one. They longed for this baby all their days since they had just the girl. For years, I had heard him talk about this, the possibility of adoption. All of a sudden, he wakes up that morning, and then he goes to bed, and he has a baby. And that guy and his wife, man, they love this child like you cannot believe. I tell you what, it is clear to me whenever I see them together, there's a bond there that equals biological parenthood. It equals it. Because God puts that into the world, and sometimes the one who is the second one is the one who has the greater influence and control over what this little person will become. And God put that baby into the hands of a very great, godly man. Oh, this guy knows the Scriptures better than me. He's a better thinker than me. He's a mighty Christian. And I have no doubt, he's already teaching his his teenage daughter, teaching her like Christian apologetics and things like that, how to defend the faith. He's raising up mighty children to the Lord. And this one isn't even his biological child. And that's the case here. There is a mighty person being raised up often by people who think they will never have children. And I want you to know, sometimes after your children are already gone, God has called you, often mothers, to be mothers to other people, to mentor them, to love them, and to raise up more mighty children who are going to break the back of Pharaoh. And that's what it's all about, to break the back of sin, to break the back of the kingdom of the devil. And so it says that she brought him to him and to her, and he became her son. And it says that the Egyptian mother is one who names him Moses. And it says, because I drew him out of the water. Out of the water. Remember when I told you that it looked like this child was going down towards his doom, down towards his death? He's being put in the water that will be his grave, most likely. But you know what? He went towards that grave as a slave. Do you see the gospel forming inside of this picture? He goes down towards the grave, born a slave. Like we're born a slave to sin. And then they think all hope is lost and it's going to just drag you down to nothing. And all of a sudden, he's drawn forth back out of the water. Raised up into royalty. Free from slavery of his own brethren. And matter of fact, he's the image of Christ there. That it is through this image of a type of death of this infant that he is raised up back to life. And guess what he does? He comes back and he is the great deliverer who will deliver them all. But you know what the prophet had said? Moses himself gave the prophecy of someone who was like him before he died. And he said, the Lord God will raise up for you a prophet like me, and unto him will be the gathering of the people. He will deliver his people from their sins. Do you see what has happened here? This is the image that we have in baptism. Do you know that when you're baptized, that what is happening is that you're imitating the death and burial and resurrection of Jesus Christ? If you ever listen to what that preacher whispers over you whenever he dunks you in the water, sometimes they don't have a microphone, but often they're saying, buried with him in death, risen with him in newness of life, and goes from slavery all the way to newness of life. This is the power of God that works through all things. And you often question it, but God is working in your life right now to make you something magnificent, that you will break the power of sin in your life and Egypt will go down. Let's all stand.